and all, and it's my privilege to welcome each one of you on behalf of TRACI. For those who do not know me, I'm Isaac Thomas, Director of Training at TRACI. So at present, I live in Kerala, so I work from Kerala and working in TRACI. So we are privileged to have each one of you, and welcome to all of the participants from different parts of the world. I think there are people from Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Nepal, and I think some others from even from Europe I have seen. So welcome to each one of you, and special welcome to all the 4 panelists. I will introduce them, each one of them a bit later. So we will start with a word of prayer. I request Raj Mandal, the board member of TRACI, as well as the TRACI working group member. So Raj Mandal will do the opening prayer.
Let's pray. Dear God and Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to you for this evening because you have enabled us to talk about and listen from your children who are engaged in this task of caring for the creation that you have entrusted to humankind. Father, we know that we have not done our stewardship role very well, and therefore all these issues and concerns related to climate change, environmental degradation and pollution, which is causing havoc in the lives of the people and especially the poor. Father, we confess that we have not taken this responsibility seriously, especially among the people who follow Christ Jesus. And so, Father, we want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to listen from people in whose heart you have placed this concern and who are doing something actively in creating awareness among people and doing something on the ground. And we pray, Father, that you will bless each one of us as we listen to the panelists and as we engage in this conversation. We pray, Father, that we'll be able to receive new insights, and through this learning that we will be able to make a difference in our own homes, in our personal life, in our churches, and in our own spheres of influence. To that end, we want to commit this evening, and we pray for your guidance to our panelists and Isaac as he moderates the discussion. May this evening would be an evening which is of much use for the work of your kingdom and for the betterment of this creation that you created. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Raj Mandal. Yeah, once again, I welcome each one of you for this evening webinar on climate justice and creation care. TRACI exists to promote integral mission or holistic mission. So integral mission is not only, just a minute. Integral mission is not just evangelism and social responsibility, but it involves the whole concerns and counsel of God for the entire creation. Therefore, ecology, environmental concerns, and creation care is very much part of the mission of the church and Christian community. And this month's reflection comes after the conclusion of COP26, which was concluded on 12th November 2021. So it will be relevant to consider themes around climate change, COP, and a Christian calling to care for creation. So this theme is a very vast theme, and we have a very eminent and expert panelists with us this evening. And let me introduce each one of them one by one. We have Ms. Rokum, who is popularly and fondly known as Cookie, comes from Mizoram in Northeast India. She currently serves on the leadership team at Evangelical Fellowship of India Commission on Relief, EFICO, in New Delhi, looking after the training and mobilization department. Ms. Cookie is passionate about issues of justice and has been involved in teaching and speaking on justice issues. She has also conducted training on integral mission, HIV and AIDS, creation care, and climate change, peace building, etc. Cookie is on the leadership team of Renew Our World, which is a global campaign on creation care and climate change. And she lives in Delhi. So we are happy that Ms. Cookie could join this evening with her lot of experience and expertise. Welcome, Cookie, to our midst. And we have Mr. Isaac Gergen from Ladakh. Isaac is an artist from Ladakh at the northern border of India and the director of Art for Change Foundation. After studies at Messiah College, Pennsylvania, USA, and completing his BFA in Visual Arts from Emily Carr University in Vancouver, Canada, he moved back to his hometown Leh, where he developed art program as the arts officer of local arts NGO, Ladakh Arts and Media Organization, which is known as LEMO. He has also worked as production manager at Bharti Kar Studios, New Delhi, and now brings his organizational skills and visionary thinking to the Art for Change leadership team. Isaac continues to find time to photograph, paint, and exhibit in between his work. So Isaac also integrates art with various social concerns like mental issues and also concerns like climate change, ecology, so on and so forth through his art. So we are happy that Isaac, a budding artist, a young leader, is with us to interact with us this evening. And we have Mr. Matthew John from Kotagiri, which is part of Nilgrid district near Ooty in Tamil Nadu. Matthew is the managing director of Last Forest Enterprises and co-founder of Keystone Foundation. Last Forest Enterprises is a social enterprise which believes that its mission is to pioneer sustainable living choices by connecting markets and communities. He is passionate in every aspect that goes into running organizations and constantly examines ways in which institutions can evolve and be relevant. So he envisions this evolution to the people-centric and based on the values and principles that the organization stands for. Mr. Matthew John and family, he lives with his family, his wife, Annie, and the two children in Kotagiri. So we are long-time friends since 2001 onwards. We are part of the same church fellowship. So I'm happy that he could join with us this evening.
Thank you.
And we have Ms. Anita, also from Keystone Foundation, another director of Keystone. She graduated from Bombay University and did her master's from Pondicherry and her doctorate in botany from the University of Hawaii. And she leads the biodiversity team at Keystone, which undertakes implementation and action research projects on human-wildlife interactions, apiculture, restoration, and climate change. The community-based conservation program at Keystone is supported by a team of barefoot ecologists who are local indigenous women, men, and youth. She is one of the founders of the Nilgrid Natural History Society. She is also the chair of the Western Ghats Plant Specialist Group of the SSC IUCN, which was established in 2019 and has a 50+ members who are scientific and practice experts from the region. She's also contributed widely to various journals, conference papers, and she's also written certain articles in few of the books. And she's also a course director with the Cornell, in collaboration with Cornell University for field learning, which is again part of the Keystone Foundation and their work. So Anita also is a good friend of us, as family friends since 2001. So happy that even Anita also could join with us this evening. Once again, welcome to all the panelists. Now, let me briefly mention the structure this evening for our program. Since it's a very, very vast subject, I have asked Mr. Matthew and Ms. Anita to present in PowerPoint the basic concepts, the basic understanding of what is climate change and what is the urgency of the addressing issue and the climate change and all the related issues. And after that, then I will be interacting with the other panelists. And towards the end, when it comes to the practical aspects, all of them will be again given chance to interact and give their own opinions. And once the interaction with the panelists is over, we hope to give some time for the participants to interact with you, to give you clarifications and discuss your questions. So that is how we have planned. We hope to finish it by 8:30. In case if it is not over with all the question answers, perhaps we would close officially by 8:30, and we may take a few more minutes after 8:30. That is how we are planning it. And now we would begin. And over to Matthew and Anita to provide us a basic understanding of what is climate change, and provide us the basic issues, what are the related issues, and what is the urgency of addressing this issue. Over to Matthew and Anita.
Thank you, Isaac. Greetings once again from Kotagiri. I'm Matthew and part of this organization, Keystone Foundation, which I'll give you a little bit of a background so that when we explain about climate change, you are able to get a context of the kind of work that we're doing and how that has helped us to understand this issue and to be able to take some steps around it. So Keystone Foundation is a trust. It's a non-religious organization based in Kotagiri. We are 28 years old, and it primarily works with indigenous communities, and it works in mountain systems. That's a very unique combination because most of the time mountain systems and indigenous communities are not on the radar of most people. They are also politically, they are not very significant because they don't bring in the vote. So, but when policies are made, we never have an understanding of how to deal with these ecosystems. And so for Keystone, it was very important that we work in such an area because it helps us bring to the forefront many of the issues that these communities and these ecosystems face. So we've, like Isaac mentioned about Anita founded the Nilgrid Natural History Society. She was one of the founding members. It's a civil society organization which works with school and urban folk around in the hills. We also have a producer organization which works directly with indigenous communities. It has about 1,600 members directly who are members of that organization. And we have a private company. So all together, this set of institutions, there are about 200 people who work on these issues around in these hills. We also work with a lot of partner organizations in the eastern and western Ghats of India, because we believe that these mountain systems, as they extend along on both sides of our country, if we do not try and address many of these issues in partnership with many other organizations, will be just a speck on the horizon and we won't be able to make an impact. So Anita will take us forward a little bit. She will try and explain to us some basic concepts about climate change and also the Indian and global context of what's happening. I will then join her later in giving a little more examples of the kind of work that we're doing. Yeah, so over to you, Anita.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen and putting up the slides. So is this visible?
Yeah, it's just starting.
Okay, I'm going to put it on full screen. I'll have to, Tara, I think my internet.
It's fine.
It's fine. Is it
That's
on?
fine. It's fine, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, now that Matthew has introduced our context and where we are coming from, this is how I wanted to start this with all of you here. That how much are we accepting of the fact that climate change is a sign of these times? And in the Gospels, this particular verse in Matthew and in Luke also, where Actually, in Luke, Jesus uses a very strong word. He says, "You hypocrites, you can read the signs of the weather, but you cannot see the signs of the times." And there's a whole, there's a sort of indication about how we look at the sky and we predict the weather, we say what's going to happen, but we're not willing to accept things that are not comfortable for us. So I think that, right. So basically what this is going to sound like a bit of a class because, so forgive me, and I'm not assuming, I'm just going to start from the basics. So, so many of you may know many of these things, but I'm not taking any assumptions here. And this is also part of a workshop that we held for all the partners that Matthew talked about across Western and Eastern Ghats. We had a 3-day workshop for our partners to talk about the basics of climate change. So I borrowed these slides from that workshop. Matthew, we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, weather and climate. We're always sometimes interchanging the words. Weather is the short-term state of the atmosphere, while the climate is the long-term pattern. Many weather readings, many sets of data on weather, many years of data contribute to us understanding what the climate is about. So that's where the word climate comes from. The next slide, please. Yeah, can we shift? Yeah, so one of the fundamental issues that led to climate change is this whole greenhouse effect. And very often we forget that there is a natural greenhouse effect. This beautiful planet that we live on has this protective layer of ozone that has kept the balance in terms of the temperature, the radiation. So there is a natural greenhouse effect. And today what we are facing is the human enhanced greenhouse effect. A greenhouse effect which has led to this disbalance, that has led to the heating up of the planet, led to several climate extreme situations that we are facing. And so many times in the context of climate change, several of us use the word anthropogenic climate change, because to distinguish from the fact that we are not talking about the natural climate change. Climate is supposed to change, weather changes every day, or we would have no conversations to make. So climate does change, but there is an accelerated climate change because of human actions, from extra industrialization, from development, from several aspects that we know about. And I also want to mention that, several of these slides we hope to leave with you. So if you're interested in taking this PowerPoint and referring, so we put a lot of text and reference material that I hope will be useful to many of you. The next slide, please. Yeah, so this is again from Wikipedia. This is actually a map of all the tropical cyclones and storms that we've had from 1970 to 2005. Very interestingly, and we always hear of cyclones and storms along our eastern coast in the Bay of Bengal. But today, as we see increasingly, there are more reports of storms and cyclonic effects along our west coast. And these could be attributed to changing climate and heating up of the ocean surface. I live in Bhopal, and I shouldn't, someone could say that I live in Bhopal and I don't need to worry about what's happening in the ocean. Not true. What's happening in the oceans affects us too on land, and this is what the weather patterns have been showing of late. Next slide, please. I just put this slide here to say that everything in climate change is an interaction between the Earth systems and the human systems. And you'll see that none of these arrows are unidirectional. So this means it forms a feedback loop system, so every action has a reaction. And what we are seeing is a sort of action reaction between these two systems. Our actions impacting the Earth, Earth's systems impacting our actions. And this is how we've reached where we've reached today. Next slide, please. Now, in the whole climate change world, these are terms that you will always hear, right? There's the climate, and this is how the world is now working on sort of making it a better planet by working on several aspects of climate. What we see is there's a whole climate governance mechanism, there's a climate fund, there's climate research, there's action. All of this is driving us to is in the hope that we can reach a state of where we will be more resilient to climate change through good adaptation and mitigation measures. And more of this I will explain as we go further. Next slide, please. So just taking the governance, for instance. On this slide, I've tried to put together the several bodies, in terms that you would also hear when you hear about climate change politics, climate change debates. Now, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC as it's called, is the governing body at the UN, which negotiates, which has put all these targets towards helping nations address the issue of climate change. You also hear of the IPCC, right? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that's the scientific body, the body that does the research, collects the data, which informs the policies that the UNFCCC makes towards various protocols, agreements that nations agree on. So every time with the UN, there is a convention or there is a framework or some kind of charter, nations get together to ratify, sign, and to monitor progress on it. And that's what essentially the Conference of Parties, or the COP, that is often referred to. So there's a COP for the UNFCCC. There's also a COP for the Convention on Biological Diversity. I think they meet once a year to just assess how far we've made some promises. We've signed on this agreement. What have we done towards it? How well are we progressing? There's a lot of negotiation and dialogue that happens. And on this slide, again, I've put some of the kind of frameworks, the targets, the decisions that are made at these important events. And countries are held accountable to these decisions. Next slide, please. Next slide, Martha. Yeah. So, so then how real is climate change for India? There's this very interesting data set, which is available at downtoearth.org. Which is a publication from the Center for Science and Environment based out of Delhi. And it's a very interesting data set for those of you who are interested in knowing more about how real is this climate change in our country. This particular data set gives it in terms of what's happening to peninsular India, what's happening to the Himalayan region, what's happening in the desert region, what's the kind of impacts climate is having on our water table, on drought, on rainfall. So it's a very interesting fact sheet that's put out there and a very interesting resource that we use in several of our education and outreach material. Next slide, please. Now, in the context of climate, it's not just about how it affects the earth, how it affects plants, water, not all of that. There's a whole debate and dialogue on how does climate affect gender, how does climate affect justice, how is climate in terms of race. So looking at several aspects of our human lives through the lens of climate has been an important aspect of the work of climate change, especially, why is it important to look at it in the lens of gender? Gender means, looking at the roles of men, women, youth, different sectors of society. And there you see that how several of the climate stresses that are caused impact women. For instance, women, all of us know that women around the world are responsible for water-related chores, bringing water, washing, several of those activities. In India, women make up 65% of the agricultural workforce. Yet, very rarely do you see a photo of a woman when it's a discussion about farmers, right? And then women are important collectors of forest produce, fuel, wood, medicinal herbs, non-timber forest products. And all of these in turn are affected by climate. How this has impacts on the lives of women or lives of girl children who are going to school is something that the climate dialogue does look at. Next slide, please. This is again, there was a very good illustrator. He still does, Rustam Vania, Down to Earth. And in 2008, he came up with this range of illustrations on the climate debate. And this is what we also hear, that the Northern Hemisphere, the developed nations, how they've developed on carbon fossil fuels. And today, when climate change is real, it's about putting the pressure on the Southern Hemisphere, developing nations saying, you clean up, help us clean up the emissions. You can't use coal, you can't use carbon. So this is the kind of scenario where the justice rooted in climate debate is put up. The next slide, please. So this particular slide is taken from several images that were out there in the internet after Cyclone Isla. You know, we never think in terms of, I mean, I think we're all aware, we're a very conscious group. I think we're a very socially aware group here today. And we know how poverty-stricken, marginalized communities, elderly, the sick, how they are most affected when these kind of climate extreme events happen, like floods, cyclones, and typhoons. In terms of race, for instance, even the cyclone, I forget the name of that cyclone that hit the United States in New Orleans. And, you know, it was actually a whole African-American neighborhood that was wiped out. But it was largely African-American people who are still not yet fully back on their feet after that cyclone effect. And then the question of race and color and the disparity when climate justice has to be meted out. Matthew, next slide, please. I wanted to put this out here because I also learned this recently. You know, the number of, so at the country level, when we are at the United Nations, we place forward the plans that we have at national level. State governments have state action plans. Yes, thank you, the Katrina cyclone. And, you know, we have several systems in place to address and to meet our targets of reducing emissions, of renewable energy, of increasing carbon sinks, which we do through afforestation, growing trees. And it was very interesting that this National Action Plan for Climate Change, how many missions there are already. There's a national solar mission, there's a national mission for greening India, a national mission for sustainable agriculture. I think it's very important for all of us who work with communities to know that these mechanisms are available. Now, whether they're working, how efficient they are, that's for another presentation. But right now, these exist, and how can we tap into it? Matthew, next slide, please. I love this sunflower. Matthew said this is a very wordy text, but I wanted to leave it here also for your references, because I'm amazed at the kind of things that are thought out in terms of how can we become more climate smart, how can we become more climate resilient. And this is a diagram which says about how in food production, how many different aspects of resilience we can build up as a nation. Yeah, the next slide, please. Yes, and then the climate fund and finance, that's another whole realm where now there's something called the Green Climate Fund, where countries, especially developed nations, have made commitments that they would pay certain amounts, large amounts of money, with which developing nations could use for several of their clean energy, several of their climate resilience contributing strategies. It's at a poor state because I don't think any of those developing countries have contributed to the fund as yet. It has some amounts of money. Some of the nations which are most challenged are the island nations, because for them, climate change means they lose their whole country. The sea level rise is a reality for them. Several of them, though affluent in those small island nations, have already started buying land elsewhere in other countries, but that's not something that every citizen of those small islands can do. But these kind of funds and finances are essentially there were thought out to help communities and people, but I don't think it's doing what it's supposed to be. In India, these funds come through the NABARD facility that we have in our country. Yeah, next, please. Matthew has some good examples on adaptation and mitigation, so I'll leave that for him to discuss. This is something that is a very much an important part of the climate change discussion and discourse. You know, there are some things that are easier done, like mitigation, some things that are harder to do, like adaptation, because it means you have to make choices to use less, consume less. My last slide, Matthew, the next one. You know, so finally, this whole climate conundrum or the confusion, there are three interesting dialogues that I always refer to. So the scientists are always working on, the technical people. they want to see how we can continue or increase our energy requirement by reducing current emissions. One of the hardest facts to digest in this whole climate change debate is that now we understand that it's affluence which is the cause of climate change and environmental degradation. Several years ago at the Earth Summit in Rio, our then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, told the whole world that India is facing severe environmental degradation because of its poverty. I'm sure if she was alive today, she would be open enough to admit that it's not the poverty which is causing the environmental degradation, but it's the way, the choices we make in terms of consumption. And finally, there's the ethical dialogue. It's really about, can we reduce consumption in developed nations and raise the affluence in developing nations using clean technology? Even this is really hard because none of those clean technologies come free or cheap. And therefore, it's really a difficult thing for any developing nation to use. And this is where the whole politics of climate change is a lot about politics. And I think it's a good thing because it's not something that only technically sound expert people need to know about. It's something that it affects each of our lives, and therefore everyone's part of the climate change discourse. So Matthew, over to you, the next slide.
Yeah. So while Anita has given you a background, something which for us as just ordinary people, two words we hear all the time, adaptation and mitigation. And these words have a lot of, there's a lot of depth in those words. So adaptation just by its simple definition, how do you adapt to a certain scenario which has already occurred? And mitigate is to be able to reduce the damage that is happening. And it happens that most of the time we are asking people to adapt. And who is being asked to adapt? It is actually the poorer people who are being asked to adapt. And that's what Anita, the example she's given of the affluent countries which have made their own steps in the way they have developed, especially in terms of industrialization. And so all the comforts they already have. And now, who is being asked to adapt? People in India, people in Bangladesh, they are being asked to adapt. Yeah, and nobody is talking about mitigation. And when you have to make a change, and so I took one example, which is just fashion, and I've just pulled some data off, and if you see that, it is quite horrifying the way just fashion is impacting climate change. You see. Just as an example again, is 30, 40, 50 years ago, we were still handing down clothes from one generation to the next. My cousins wore some jeans. Those jeans got handed down to me. Sweaters and jackets came down. Today, there is literally nothing that happens like that. We all want to buy new clothes. And what was fashion last year is not a fashion this year. And so there is an urge, a drive to buy new clothes. And if you look at that, earlier fashion changed. If you had, bell bottoms in the 70s, I mean, they existed for 10 years, but today it has changed overnight. And so now it is, you are already driving by the quarter, you are asking for change in fashion. And if you look at this slide, it just gives you the kind of dump that is created by the amount of fashion change, because we are just discarding clothes in such huge numbers. And so this pollution is not only the chemicals that is there, but all the microplastics that go into the production. Cheap clothes bought and cast aside, and landfills, 85% of all textiles is there in landfills. I wanted to give another example. And if you look at, so Anita was talking about 65% of women in India, in the agriculture sector, 65% are women who are working. And if you look at forest and agri-produce, that's where climate change impacts us, because our agriculture is largely rain-fed. And an example again of just honey, whether it is wild or cultivated, these are all small producers. You know, we can talk about thousands of tons of honey that is going out and being exported out of India, but it is coming from these small producers who are, with every change in the weather pattern, they do not know whether they will get honey because there is no nectar, there is no pollen. Yeah. And so you really, many of these small businesses, they cannot plan and they cannot look after their own livelihoods. And so I leave you here with just this slide as a closing slide of how these two examples of fashion and agriculture are just very small stories on that map of climate change that is impacting us every day. Yeah, and so over to you, Isaac.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew and Ananda, for providing that basic understanding of climate change. And not only that, the climate change is a matter of justice. It's a justice issue, especially when we look at the people who are marginalized, the poor, the women, and also the perspective of the global south versus global north. It's a justice issue. So thank you for bringing that into a notice. And now I would ask Ms. Cookie to explain what is the scriptural call for regarding creation care and how it is related to loving our neighbor. So what is a scriptural call for regarding creation care and how it is related to neighbor love? So over to Ms. Cookie.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation and a very, very quick lesson on climate change. But I'm sure many of us know a little bit about it. We haven't even had time to look at the impact of climate change, although very little, very quickly. Now, when we talk about, I was asked to speak about scripture, what the Bible says. Now, I wonder, I don't know, have you ever wondered, should we be, as Christians, be bothered about climate change? Because the Bible does not talk about climate change. You know how we good Christians are, we look at scripture, we open, and if scripture says something about it, the Bible says something about it, then we are very concerned about it. So we are very focused on a few things, which is wonderful. And so, climate change is new. It's a new terminology. A few years ago, we didn't even know the term climate change. We continue to wrestle even with the term climate change. There are climate change deniers. There are people who think, it's real, unreal, it's a political issue, blah, 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 blah. And all of that, how does the word of God fit into it? Because the Bible does not directly talk about climate change. But in my journey with creation care, what I've realized is it's very basic. This is God's earth. This is God's earth. Psalm 24:1 says so clearly that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So we very start with the very basic thing of this is God's earth. And if some of you are like me who grew up in Sunday school, you will know that one of the first verses you learned as a Sunday school child was Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we know very well from scripture that this is God's earth. This is God's world. He created it. And how did he create it? He created it good. And I know I don't need to repeat the Genesis account of creation. And if we are Bible-believing Christians, we know that this is God's earth. It is he who created everything, and he created it good. In fact, at the end of creation, when God creates human beings, Adam and Eve, he looks back at all that he had created and even says, it is very good. I'm amazed that our God is a God who pats himself on the back and says, good, this is good. I've done a good job. He gave the word he created, and he says he is so appreciative of what he has created that he says that it is very good. And for me, that's enough, really. This is God's world. He created it good, and he wants it to flourish in that way. Again, when he created us human beings, Genesis 1:27 clearly says that we are image bearers of God. That's an incredible responsibility already there. Image bearers of God, not in terms of the way I look and the way I feel, or the way my hair is or how my nose is. No, it's in the characteristics of God. And one of the basic characteristics of God is to care for what he created, what he called good and even very good. And I would urge you to go back to scripture as well. Read Genesis 2. It has an amazing account of the Garden of Eden, what God created. If you look at it, read it again, because sometimes all the creation stories, Sunday school stuff. Let us teach it to beginners and primary. They will draw 2 animals each and blah blah blah, and that's finished. We relegate it to the small tiny children because it makes for good songs, it makes for good drawings and good activities. No, but if you look back at scripture in Genesis 2, it's an amazing description of the Garden of Eden, the rivers that flow, the trees that are there, and it even describes saying things like the trees that are good to look at, visually appealing, and good to eat. So God didn't just take care of like they should look good, but they were good to look at and good to consume as well. And it is in this garden that God told Adam and Eve to work it, not just to sit back and relax and eat all that was given, but to work it and to take care of it. And in fact, if we look at it that way, it was the first mission that God gave human beings. We think the first mission was, later on when, after Jesus goes up and, he tells his disciples to go into, or to the ends of the earth. No, this was the first mission. What is mission? It is something God asks us to do, to take part in. And this was the first mission that God gave human beings, is to take care of it and to tend it, to work it. And as image bearers of God, our stewardship of creation has to reveal all of God's characteristics, which also includes justice that we are concerned about today. And if we look at the different nuances in the story of creation, we will see that there is a section where God says to Adam to name the animals. And I find that fascinating because naming is such a personal, intrinsic thing. Who gave you your name? Who have you asked your children to be named? Not some stranger, but a very close relative or somebody very special does the naming. And here, I feel that it's a significant job, that God gave Adam to name, is to bond that relationship, to signify and to put emphasis on the relationship that we as human beings need to have with the rest of the created order, with animals. And the fascinating story, again, in the story of Noah, which we relegate to Sunday school, it's the story of God's salvation. For the first time, human beings sinned, God destroyed through a flood. And who did God rescue? Not just human beings, but God was interested not just in human beings, but in all the animals as well. And when finally, at the end of that flood period, when God makes a covenant, he makes a covenant with not just human beings, but with the rest of the living creatures as well. Again, this is fascinating. Why? Human beings are the most important. Yes, we are, because we've been given that privilege to take care of God's creation, the rest of creation. But God also makes a covenant, not just with Noah and his children and the descendants that are to come, but with all the living creatures. We don't have time to open scripture and do that. But if you look at Genesis chapter 9, verses 8 to 17, God again emphasizes again and again and again that this covenant, this pact, this agreement is made, the agreement that you will never destroy life like this again, is made with human beings and with the rest of the living creatures that were in the ark with Noah. What does that mean? Why does God bother to make a covenant with living creatures? That snake, that cow, that goat, that whatever, why does it matter to God? Why should you make an agreement with something that really doesn't matter? But God made a covenant with the rest of the living creatures because it mattered to God as well. And we can look in the rest of scripture. We don't have time to do that. But Romans 8:19 to 22, all creation is longing for God to come back. Not just human beings, all creation. In Colossians 1:20 to 22, Ephesians 1:9 to 10, everything will be reconciled to God. Everything in heaven and on earth. And so God's reconciliation and salvation plan is not just for human beings, but for all of creation. Redemption is for all of creation. And that is what creation is waiting for, longing in eager expectation, longing, so that we, the children of God, our eyes may be opened and we may be the agents of that change, of that redemption as well. Now, as I said, the first mission that God gave us as human beings was to take care of the earth. When somebody gives us a mission, there is also accountability. We study, and at the end of the year, we have an exam. And accountability is also going to be taken from us. In Revelations 11:18, so clear, it says this, there's a time is going to come to judge. We're all waiting for that reward. Most of us Christians are waiting for that reward. When I get to heaven, while we'll have so much fun and whatever not, and we'll sing and pearly gates and whatever not. But the other thing, it says in Revelations 11:18, it says very clearly that the time will come to destroy those who destroy the earth as well. Revelations 11:18, the time will come, to judge everybody, everything, and to destroy those who destroy the earth. I'd rather not believe in that because I don't want to be destroyed, but it is in scripture. God expects accountability from us as well. So there is no argument for me. I don't want to go on and on. It's so clear in scripture that God wants us to look after his earth. And also, as we go into scripture, as we read in Matthew, we read very clearly about the greatest commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. And the second, which is like the first, is to love your neighbor as yourself. Again, I would like to ignore that command because it is a bit of a problem. To love my neighbor as myself, loving myself is a big job enough. To love my neighbor as myself. And if we think of loving our neighbor as ourselves in the context of creation care, in the context of living on this planet, we live on one earth. There is only one earth that is going to sustain us. And we've already looked in the earlier presentation of consumption, of affluence. Our biggest enemy is consumption. If I consume more water, more electricity, more food, that means I'm taking it away from somebody else as well. What climate change and creation care for many of us is an inconvenience. And I say that again and again. It's just an inconvenience for now, because if it's too hot, what will I do? I will just get an air conditioner. If it is too cold, I will get a heater. If it is, floods are coming, I will just relocate somewhere else, build a higher house or whatever. But climate change, which is an inconvenience for some of us, is death for many, especially the poor. And the problem is we live on one planet. If I consume more, if I chop down trees, it is going to affect not only me, but the world around us. And it's not just about, I live in India, so it doesn't matter. The carbon emissions that we have wherever we are in the world is affecting the ozone layer that Anita was talking about earlier. And if it affects that, it is going to result in this world becoming even more hotter. And as we've seen, there are more disasters that are taking place every single day. And the sad bit is that those who live most lightly pay most heavily. A poor farmer, a poor slum dweller, their consumption is very, very little. But the price they have to pay for climate change and environmental disaster is most of the time death. How does that fit into our thinking about loving our neighbor as myself? I can afford this. I can afford the air conditioning. I can afford to fly everywhere. I can afford to buy new clothes every season. We were reminded about fashion. In the last season, so they will have, they will have sales every season there's a sale because that fashion is growing old. I can afford it, so who are you to tell me what to do? But the thing is, my choices will mean whether some poor person dies or not. And I think we need to take that very seriously. Loving our neighbor as ourselves also means the way we consume every single thing, the food we consume, the food waste in India. There are horrific statistics about food waste, and we're not going to go into that. Even this pandemic, who is paying most heavily for this pandemic? If you look at statistics and news reports now, rich people are becoming richer, and there are new poor. The poor are becoming poorer, and there are new poor because of this COVID pandemic. How did this pandemic start? It's a zoonotic disease passed on from animals to human beings. How did it start? Because we decided to chop down trees. We decided to change the trees that are grown because I need teak in my, as furniture. And these are causing loss of biodiversity, that are causing these pandemics to go on and flourish. And we will have more pandemics in the future. Loving your neighbor as yourself. How does it affect the poor? And we've talked about COP. I was there in Glasgow. I was there in Peru, in Paris, in Bonn, and I was there in Glasgow as well. And it's so important for us as Christians to have a voice. Because I noticed when I first went in Lima, I was overwhelmed. I was there in only one Christian gathering over there. It was a breakfast meeting where pastors had been called, and here I was sharing about what we're doing in India. In Paris, it was a bit better. There were more Christian events that happened. In Bonn, we tried our best, and we went to a church that said, well, they have come here for a political gathering. It was nothing Christian, Christians didn't have anything to do with these climate meetings. It was a political gathering that we need to pray for. And I spoke twice in that church. But in Glasgow, things were very different. The church was so engaged. And there was this group called the Young Christian Climate Change Network that were there, that were doing these marches. There was a relay walk that they were doing, raising their voices. And I was excited, because young Christians were there marching. Young Christians were there speaking up and saying, it matters to God, so it matters to me. In Glasgow, there was a church right in the center called the St. George's Tron, where so many of these Christian events were happening. And I was fascinated that this church had opened its doors, and the staff were working 24/7, hosting one Christian after the other, these events. I was there in a charismatic, church, where they were praying and worshiping and saying, this matters to God. And so it gave me hope that the Christian church is beginning to wake up and raise our voice. And I think that's a big, big challenge to us as well. Many of the challenges that I have seen, I know my time has run out, is that many people say, Arey, yaar, Christians, we don't have time. We have more urgent needs. God expects us to do many more things. But if we read scripture carefully, I would say that, caring for creation or doing these things are not an optional extra. It was there right from the beginning of the Bible, right from creation, when we human beings were created. It is not an option that is tagged on. And this evening, I don't want you to go back and say, well, now I'm going to become an environmentalist. No, the call is not to become an environmentalist. The call is to become better disciples of Jesus. Because as it was said in the Cape Town commitment that came out of Lausanne 2010, creation care is because of the gospel and not instead of the gospel. So if we seriously take our discipleship as Christians, then creation care is not an option that we do separately, but part of our very Christian nature and worship of God. And I will end with this slide. There is a book that has come out called John Stott on creation care, writings of Sam Berry, edited by Laura Yoda. And I love this because it says it's possible for Christians to borrow the narrative of the secular environmental movement and merely gloss it with a bit of God language. But there are some very significant differences between secular environmentalism and the Christian approach to what we would call the care of creation. And part of the quote says, Christians care for creation, not because they necessarily believe they're going to save the world or because they believe that this is the flavor of the times, but simply out of their response to a loving creator. So I hope that we will be able to respond. We will be able to be involved as a response to our loving Creator. And I know we have models to look at now, and I'll hand over to Isaac to take us to the next. Isaac is going to share with us amazing models of how we can do that.
Thank you, Ms. Cookie, for sharing with us and providing us the scriptural warrant for creation care. I think most of us perhaps knows the basics, but yet when we look at the church history and the development of theology, perhaps the Christian church, the Christians are guilty of making the Bible too anthropocentric, especially when we look at the creation. Many times we conveniently interpret that the entire creation exists for the humanity, it's for the human beings. But we forget that the creation exists primarily for God. So Ms. Cookie has brought out that very well. Thank you for bringing that, and also sharing your experience with COP. Now how the church also is coming forward and changing, slowly changing, and their own understanding and how we need to engage. And thank you for that beautiful quote from John Stott, and thank you for this time. And now we would ask Mr. Isaac Gergen to suggest us some practical involvement, how for a collective response from Christian groups and as individuals and as a community, how we need to practically involve. And also you can suggest a few models of engagement. After that, even the rest of the panelists also will give their opinion and their own experience and insights. Over to Mr. Gergen.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. It was really great to listen to the presentations, and especially I was excited to hear the role of the church and us as Christians, how we can be a part of this conversation. So in the next about 7 minutes, what I'm going to try to do is share a model of engagement on 3 different levels. One is on governance, on civil societies, and on the individual level, closer to home. So with the government section, we're looking at civil society organizations, and that can include churches, organizations like TRACI, Keystone, Ethicor, and even Art for Change can all be identified as CSOs. CSOs are important sources of information for both citizens and the government. They help identify gaps where the government may be lacking. It empowers communities and gives voice to the voiceless of society. They play an important role in enhancing transparency of processes and in promoting good governance. Lastly, they're resources for informing action on ground. In this role, CSOs need to be well aware of the gaps in socio-economic development and related environmental issues. We also need to invest in knowledge and strengthen platforms such as this that discuss societal issues, helping to better engage with the government. Governments, on their part, need to strengthen understanding of their actions and of societal challenges and efforts in working towards addressing these gaps. CSOs can engage with the government in playing a role for capacity building and implementation of actions that can bring change on the ground. In the context of climate change and just transition, social economic development challenges in the post-COVID era, CSOs play an important role in identifying the societal and environmental impacts on the ground and providing this information not only to governments, but to the public at large, and also taking informed actions themselves. As shared in earlier presentations, one of the key challenges with climate change is the growing inequalities between different sections of society. Sections of society that are more dependent on their natural environment often do not have the capacity to adapt to challenges posed by climate change. For instance, like Ms. Cookie was sharing, easily we can have ACs for the summers and heaters for the winters, but which can be afforded by us, but it's not the same for the economically poor. Further, the use of heaters and ACs also contribute to greater emissions. So that for these, we need to be well informed of our own actions, but also look at ways to empathize inform governments, and help the weaker sections of society adapt to climate change. Climate change also diminishes the resources for resource-dependent communities, which can not only cause conflicts, such as in Syria, but also increase migration and the number of refugees. There's a need to be knowledgeable, identify solutions, and engage with the government on such issues. We also need to present on ground to provide support to those who are being impacted by such issues. The concept of LNOB, leave no one behind, needs to be important in how we engage on matters with the government. A little closer to us in the civil society, engagement with the public needs to be relational and provide motivation for change. A behavioral change in society and on an individual level is effectively brought about when society is able to connect and empathize with the subject. Christian institutions play a pivotal role in empathizing with needs, especially bringing voice to the voiceless. Now, from my field of work at Art for Change, we find that art-based public engagement is a powerful tool for outreach and communication. Taking from the adage, art can speak louder than 1,000 words. This adage accentuates the significance of art, and within the workings of today's society, art has that ability to take complex messages, engage its makers and audience, and create art products that are succinct yet powerful. Further, at Art for Change, we invest in the artist as much as the art. There's a self-multiplying quality here, and artwork is not only seen many times over generations, but also the artist, once impacted, goes on to create many artworks that have that much more effect or impact. We see the influence of art span wide from the humble sort of conversation starter, and also influencing policy change. And then we can identify art and what role that plays in our lives. Recently, a book was gifted to me by Rohan Chakrabarti, The Green Humor for a Grain Planet. So this book, it's able to capture societal problems related with climate change with a humorous cartoon strip and yet bring powerful messages. So I've really enjoyed reading this book so far. But such engagements, there's a lot on climate change, but how do we, these I think make it more readily understandable, even if it's through a simple comic strip. We can use art in engaging with the public at large and in bringing important messages about climate around the impacts of our consumption and pollution to the forefront. Now, institutions and CSOs can intentionally opt to have their teams be a part of a creative process to build knowledge around climate change and promote behavioral change, be it posters in office spaces or inspiring artwork at home. So again, we're looking at behavioral change at the individual level, at society level, and how does that then impact even the government and policies. Here, it's not only about working with the vulnerable sections of society and bringing out their voice, but also bringing awareness to everyone's actions that are leading to inequalities in society. Now, some suggestions for what we can do individually at homes. One major factor is to see behavioral change in the way that we live our lives, and that has been shared, of course, with fashion, with food, with the decisions we make, our patterns of consumption, and to be aware of its implications on human society, but also at the environment at large. Art, again, can provide a great medium to engage individuals and bring that awareness. But we can also look at other media, social media sharing, highlighting stories of people on ground, journalistic endeavors, and more to explore these issues. Learning also needs to be transformative rather than instrumental. The knowledge one gains needs to be able to transform behavior and actions rather than providing tools that may or may not be used. Art is one way of engaging with the individual. However, the questions we need to consider, some of the questions we can consider here are, How do we empathize? How do we bring transformation? Can we reduce consumption? Can we look at ways to engage with individuals in restoring our environment? Can we look at ways to inform individual action? And very rightly, as Ms. Cookie had also shared, it is at the heart of God that we are stewards, that we serve, and we are driven by consideration and love for our neighbor. This should be the overarching reason that we need to continue to identify and look at ways to serve and engage with society. Now, my other fellow panelists also have some models of engagement they would be sharing. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank Mr. Gaggan for sharing your insights and suggestions and suggesting some models. And I was thinking there is scope for having separate webinars with all these panelists for their own expertise, because so much of content is there, but due to lack of time, we have to really limit it, make it very brief. So now we give time for the rest of the panelists to give from their own experiences to suggest a few practical models or suggestions for each one of us. Anybody can start, Matthew, Anita, or Cookie. Yeah. Quickly.
Anita, you want to start about some of the work going on in Central India and some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's also in relation to one of the questions that we got during registration, which is about Zoom cultivation or shifting cultivation. You know, it's one of those things that's been a tradition as part of our country. And today, when we look at on the global scale, you know, when they're looking at forest change, forest cover change, it's been, I would say, in a way, targeted as one of the reasons for forest degradation in India. Now, it's a real problem, and because there's a lot of burning that happens, therefore the carbon emissions are higher. There's also forests which are cut down. But in this light, one of the issues that we've been working on in Central India, we work in the states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and what we've seen is how can people, because there's a lot of goodness in the shifting cultivation, because there's a lot of food grown, a lot of women are involved, food diversity. And how then does this become, how do we continue this practice without losing all the goodness of it? So today the group actually manages what we call forest gardens. So this could be even in your kitchen garden, just increasing the diversity, growing trees, growing shrubs, growing tubers. This has been another way of adapting to less land that is available for the rotational agriculture, the pressures on the atmosphere. So, you know, this is some of the actions on the ground that farmers are taking in the project areas that we work in. So the forest gardens are, I wouldn't say replacing, are adding value to the agriculture that they do already. Yeah, Matthew, that's
Okay.
anything else?
I was just thinking from a livelihood perspective also that a lot of our work started with people who do wild honey collection. And this has been going on for thousands of years. And today, with the kind, so even if I go back 20 years, we would know that there is a natural cycle of a boom and a bust. So you would have an abundance of honey during 1 year, and then the next year there would be a much reduced production of honey. And this was something that for many of these communities, they understood that and they worked with that. And for that, their livelihoods were adjusted around the way this honey production was there. Today, it's a complete mess because you don't know, even in the middle of the season, whether you're going to get unseasonal rains, storms, and your entire honey production is smashed up. So for us, how do you work with this set of people? And so for us, it has been, how do you increase their basket, their diversity of things that they do? Whether they are growing more coffee, they're growing more pepper, they're growing millets for their own consumption. And so once you expand that basket, or you have women working and producing value-added produce, like soaps from beeswax and all of that, then you are able to sort of manage the kind of climate cycles which have gone out of sync and help them to adapt in a yeah, these are all very polite ways of saying it, but at least they are able to manage their lives a little better.
Okay, should I just continue?
Please.
Okay. I work for EFICOR. We have a lot of projects, and I don't want to talk about projects because what we need to do is something that is doable, what you and I can do in our own homes. And I think the first thing that we can do is to assess our own selves. And that is what we've been encouraging people to do. When I was introduced, they said I'm heading the training department in EFICOR. And one of the things that we do is engage with churches at all levels, whether they're small independent churches or bigger churches, institutional churches. We've been trying to work with churches, with church leaders, pastors, whether they're small congregations or big congregations, and teaching them about creation care. And one of the models is that, you can scare people into thinking about doing something about creation care or climate change. But the best option is to start from your faith. And so we always start with scripture, because you can say, we're all going to die and therefore you have to, otherwise your house will be inundated and there'll be many floods and this will happen, that will happen. That should not be the way we work as Christians. The way we work as Christians is to go back to scripture and start with that. And we've been doing those sessions with church leaders across India, smaller church leaders as well, some bigger church leaders. We've had regional conferences, we've had small groups, and we've had incredible, I don't know if the word success is good, but incredible response from many, many church congregations, church leaders who've said, I never knew this. And so one of the models I would say is to teach as much as possible from scripture, because that is what is going to provoke us. That is what is going to inspire us into action, because faith is really important. If faith can drive you to kill somebody, can make you do lots of things, it can also inspire you to do amazing things. And so the model that I would suggest that we have been doing is to educate church leaders, educate children on it, because unless we educate, and you've got art, you've got all these different instruments that we have, God has given us all these things that we can educate. And somebody rightly said, you just can't go and say plant trees. That's really wrong. Just don't go about saying plant trees. We have worked with the forest departments wherever we've done these regional courses, or go about, in different pockets where we've worked with local church leaders, is to find out what is the native tree, or go and work with the forest department. What saplings do they have? You don't have to spend money on buying saplings. There's already the government department who has crores of saplings that need to be planted and taken care of. So all we do is connect with the government and plant, try and do that. And it's not just planting trees, because you have to nurture it into full growth. And even in the slums of Delhi, we found that one church was able to do that. Grow appropriate trees in those barren roads and streets, and the community looking after it. So it is possible. The church, or the other model, is to be a voice, to be concerned about it. We've tried lots of church leaders to sign petitions, so to show that, it matters to Christians. Because like when I've been to COP, like the first couple of times that I went, there were many other religious groups that were there raising their voice. There were many other groups, secular voices who don't even believe in God, who were there raising their voice, marching, doing all kinds of stunts around the area, but a very minuscule Christian voice. And I'm like, we are the ones who believe God created everything. And we are the ones who are like behind everybody. No, this is not so important. So I think one model again is to be a voice, to raise your voice wherever possible. The third, I would say that has worked really well is climate change. When you talk about climate change to small churches or a congregation, it seems like a very vague idea. Because we forget. Now Delhi is freezing cold. I'm freezing right now, honestly, because, I don't have a heater around me and my toes are freezing. You can't see it, but I'm freezing right now. But when I talk about climate change, okay, the wettest January in Delhi in hundreds of years, it's a very difficult concept to understand. But when you talk about things like plastic pollution, those kind of things, it's like, I can see it. So things that are visible, those are the good models to work as well. So we've worked a lot with church leaders who have also talked about, we've talked about what plastic does, the damage, even contributing to climate change. So don't think plastic is just an issue of like, rubbish and, landfills. It leads to climate change as well. It leads to global temperature rise because of the whole production, fossil fuels required to make those plastic. And that's very easy. The church can decide to reduce plastic. So we've had many church congregations who've said, no more single-use plastic. Buy your stainless steel cups, it's much better. You may need to wash it, put a little effort, but that's better than using single-time plastic that is going to choke the environment, that's going to choke God's earth. And so those are the kind of models that we have used, and they work. Baby steps. Don't expect suddenly a church to suddenly become all green and everything, but those baby steps help in encouraging, teaching, getting information. Those are the kind of models that we've worked with, and we hope to do a lot more in that.
Yeah, thank you, Cookie, and thank you all the panelists. And now I think we have to give at least around 10 to 12 minutes for the participants to raise their concerns and questions. There are a lot of comments and questions in the chat box. We may not be able to read and take up all the comments, but some of the crucial issues or questions we would be trying to deal with that. Rajmandal, can you ask your own question? Instead of I read that.
Yeah, I think Dr. Anita already responded. So basically, I was asking the question, like if affluence is the cause, as she mentioned, then how again asking that increasing the affluence in the developing nation? So that may be confusing to the common people. So that I understand she says that it is with a different meaning, but perhaps that is something maybe she can throw a little more light, because that has been one of the issue which from many decades, North versus South. So it appears to me to be a kind of a blame game that is who is responsible. So what is the way out of that? That is something I wanted to ask.
Thank you, Dash. Over to Anita.
Yeah, I think, I also responded, and then Rajanmi had this bilateral thing. Again, redefining affluence, calling it an affluence, which means I read this recently also, that affluence is if my country has a public transport system that the rich use, then my country is affluent. To have this kind of a model. So I also like to use the same terminology and turn it on its head. So I think there is value in doing that, because the big question will be how, it'll be discriminating if I say that the developing nations should not be affluent, right? So if I say that, then I will be seen as discriminating. So let's use the same terminology, turn it on its head, and make it mean things that are relevant to the times. The time is different today than it was 50 years ago, when affluence was defined. So those are the kind of discussions that I would have. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to add one thing. I've put this link called Earth Overshoot Day. If you look at that website, it talks about how and there's a whole calculation. It's very interesting. How it actually marks a date where human beings have consumed what is available from the earth for that year. And if you look at different countries, if all of us consumed like an average Australian, if everybody on this planet consumed like an average Australian, you are going to need at least 3 Earths to sustain us. If we consumed like somebody in the Middle East, we're going to need about 5 Earths to sustain us. So actually the Earth is kind of in balance right now because the poor don't consume much. So there's a lot of emphasis on affluence and consumption, not fullness of life, but when we consume too much, when we think that it belongs to us. And so that's very interesting. The Earth Overshoot, they just opened my eyes to say that I may have that privilege to purchase things, but that doesn't mean I do that, because it has an impact on the earth and on everything else, which is why loving your neighbor means checking yourself. We all want to live like people in the US. We all want to live like people in the West, but that has a heavy, heavy footprint on the earth, and the earth will simply not be able to sustain all of us. And we will find that the poor are going to be the ones who die first.
Thank you, Anita, Cookie, for that clarification. And there's a question from Sibin Solomon. His question is, we have a common misunderstanding that planting trees are an appropriate solution. But what species? Whether planting trees in grassland is appropriate, we often promote invasive species, which is conspicuous to us and economical for the local communities without understanding the habitat properly. Can we plant random trees? How can we?
I think Cookie answered that question to some extent. She already answered that question of working with the local forest department or with local civil society organizations who already have a base of nurseries that are relevant for that area, and if we do that, that itself is a great starting point. I think we've made a mess in our own country of many times. Eucalyptus is one example, but there are so many more examples of where wetlands have been destroyed, forests have been destroyed to grow tea. All of that has happened. So I think the answer is to be very conscious of what we're doing. I think also just one more line I wanted to add to what Cookie and Anita were saying is, I think if we look towards the scripture of being stewards of this earth, and I think if we look at ourselves as stewards of this earth, there is a lot of change that we will start with ourselves. Each action of ourselves to put that as a benchmark and say, where am I? And if we keep asking ourselves that question, some answers will come.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. And see, there was a request for the PPT. It's already put in the chat box. You can please download that. In case if you want later, if you contact us, I will be able to send you personally also. Okay. Now there are some other questions. Even panelists can also answer some other questions, because by the time I look at this,
I think, does anybody want to take the alternate energy, really zero emission question? Because I think that is very relevant, For instance, the kind of chemicals, minerals that is going into our LED lamp or our, energy saving. I'm not even getting the words. It definitely is challenging. So I think there's got to be this short-term and long-term impacts kind of an assessment. That's all I can think about, In the short term, maybe it does look, but in the long term, if it's not dipping into renewable resources which are so short, which are depleting fast, I think these are trade-offs that have to be done. That's my take on it. Cookie.
I'll just quickly say that every energy that we use will have emissions, but there is a balance that the earth can take. There is a certain ratio of emissions that the earth can take, which Anita also explained right at the beginning. There will be emissions. There has to be warming, but there are limits that the earth can take. That's the way God made. And what we are doing is by our patterns of use of energy, overconsumption, or whatever it is, not taking care, chopping down trees, planting all the wrong trees, changing all of that, it has distorted that balance. And so there isn't anything that is like, oh, it's completely clean or whatever. Recyclable, sustainable, those are the things that we need to look at. And the thing that we need to talk about, to speak into all of these situations, is that there are more and more, there is a lot of funding of fossil fuels that continues. The dirty energy, a lot of money is being put into funding dirty energy because it makes money in the short term. And so this is what people are speaking up against as well. Don't fund dirty energy. If we all decided that clean energy is what we're going to fund, things are going to change. But those who are already rich are not going to be as rich as they are now. It's going to break the balance. It's going to change the world. And that's what most people don't want. And therefore, it's really, really important while we speak into these situations as well, is that there's lots of money behind all of this. Even the media, the propaganda, what we're made to think, what is wrong, all of that is fueled by media, by money that is pushed into this. So Yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be looked at. Some people are even saying, what about nuclear energy? If it is contained, it's so powerful, it can be clean, you know? So there are all these issues that need to be looked at. It's very complicated and we can't solve it in one webinar. I think, you know, but we can have many more sessions about this. And in terms of the trees, again, let me tell you, if you look at Indonesia, look at what has happened to it. They planted palm oil, you know, palm oil trees, and it has devastated the forests. And so I think that's simplest, you know, that's the simplest answer, saying no. Planting whatever trees we want is not the solution. But there is also something called farmer managed natural regeneration, which is a topic for another webinar, but that's also a solution, not just planting, but the earth already has a lot of roots embedded in it, which we have destroyed from the top. And it's just to open the earth up and let those shoots come flying out and flourish. So that's called farmer managed natural regeneration. Cherian was here from World Vision. World Vision is doing that a lot in India. And we have an amazing Christian man called Tony Rinaldi from World Vision Australia, who's been teaching this as well. So if you have any time, please Google FMNR and you will find lots of solutions. Here's a Christian man who has done amazing things in restoring forests, not by planting trees, but by just untapping what is underneath the earth. So there's a lot that can be done. It's quite exciting, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Cookie. There are a lot more questions and suggestions and comments in the chat box, but I think, yeah, we will continue. We will close here officially, and unofficially we will continue. So when we officially close, let me also take this opportunity to thank all the participants for joining us this very important seminar, and we would encourage each one of you to continue your study, reflection on this very crucial topic, and let us be teachers and educators in our own community, churches and maybe small groups in our neighborhood, so that we would be able to, through our teaching and as well as proactive action, we would be able to make a small impact. It may not be a big impact, but everybody together make small impacts. It will go a long way. So we would be able to make a change for the posterity. So thank you, each one of you. And let me also thank all the panelists, Mr. Matthew John, Dr. Anita, Ms. Cookie, and Mr. Gargan. So thank you for being with us and blessing this evening for each one of us. And now I request Dr. Bonnie Miriam Jacob, the Director of Research in TRACI, to lead us in the closing prayer. After that, we will continue with the other questions and our informal discussion. Over to Bonnie.
Let's look to God in prayer. Father, we want to thank you so much for this privilege that you gave us this evening to listen to a very important topic that's of concern to you and to your children all around the world, and also to all the people of the world. We want to thank you for our panelists who brought in such important Lord, knowledge to our awareness this evening, and Lord, for the experience and for all the expertise that they have and their years of work in their different fields. We pray that even as we have listened to the things that they have shared, that you'll help us to continue grappling with them and continue to think about it, and not just stop there, but continue to create awareness and, Lord, be able to implement some of those things even in our own lives, Lord, our consumption patterns, or Lord, our sharing of our knowledge with others, and in this way contribute, Lord, to renewing our world and our planet, Lord. Thank you once again for Mr. Matthew, for Dr. Anita, for Cookie, and for Isaac. I pray that you would bless their efforts and that they will continue to carry forward this work, and that your church will truly awaken to the need that is there, which is so pressing in our times. Thank you, Lord, for this evening. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bonnie. Now we would take up the rest of the questions. We would encourage each one of you to stay back even through this time. There's a question from Professor Gauri Kumari. Dr. Anita, how can we create awareness among believers and then our neighbors?
No, I think that was answered by Cookie. She also, Gauri is also
already done. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think all of those were done. So maybe the coal fossil one, Satish Simon.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've put in my comment. Would any of the other panelists like to add? But aren't this energy what the ordinary can afford? Therefore, we have sought time till 2070. Cookie, I think your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, that's the way it is. Like if you see, we work in Jharkhand amongst tribal communities, and they still use the yellow bulb. Why? Because it costs 20 rupees or 30 rupees as compared to 100 and something rupees an LED light. So it's all, who controls the market as well. And I think, the change sometimes is expensive. It's going to take time. And this is true. We've asked for 2070 because there are so many things that need to be undone as well. And also it's India has said that they will take till 2070. Also, there are various factors in it, not just this. One of the important factors is that, you nations have done your bit. You have consumed a lot of energy. And now that the earth is collapsing because of climate change, you are demanding all other countries to do their share. So countries like India are telling US, Australia, Canada, you haven't done your share. You consumed, you used the energy, you used whatever you wanted to do. And now when it comes at a time when we have to do some repair work, you are expecting everybody to put in as much, that you should be doing. You should be doing much more. So that is the whole tussle. That's where the politics comes in, where India will not easily say, okay, we'll do our part by 2030, we'll do this, we'll do that. We will take our own sweet time because we also want to enjoy the exploits of the earth before we start committing to making these changes. It's a very intricate game. And there's a whole issue of justice as well. Many countries like Indonesia and Malaysia are saying that you have used you chopped all your trees. Now the earth needs oxygen and you are telling you don't chop your trees. How can you say that? We also will chop our trees and you don't tell us, you do your part. And it's expensive now to do all those corrective measures. So it's really complicated and I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, I think many of these things we don't have answers actually. Just that we are reflecting on them is a huge step forward. I mean, at least as a community of people, as a body of Christ, if we are thinking of how I can change, how I can make my church change, I think that's the first step forward. I'll give you another simple example of we've all become so used to e-commerce, but the kind of impact it has of packets flying back and forth, and 5 times I reject a parcel from Amazon or Myntra just because it doesn't fit my size. I mean, just imagine the kind of impact it is having, the waste that it is generating. So just at this level, if we start being conscious, it is one step. Though in the larger context, it will take a huge turnaround for that ship, but it's a start.
And this whole question about how the church can be involved. First of all, I usually challenge people, have you even prayed about it? No, very few would have actually prayed about this. Have you ever asked God for forgiveness for what you have done to the environment, what I have done, what we have done? Usually not, we don't. We don't do that. It's our personal sin and, whatever our shopping list to God is usually this one is sick, that one is sick. I need a husband, I need a wife, I need children, I need better clothes, better school, I need a visa, depending on where you are. And so I think, that consciousness has to come about, have I spoken to God about this? Have I engaged with God at this level where I feel remorseful for the way I have led my life and for this. And it's not about guilt. I don't think God wants us to be in the business of feeling guilty about things, but it's in the business of being aware that, no, this actually hurts. That is why I will refuse a plastic bag. That is why I will refuse to go with the fashion or go with everything latest and make those conscious choices. We can't live clean. We can't live without plastic at the moment. I use a toothbrush that is plastic. Even if I get a bamboo toothbrush, it's like, there are so many different challenges to it. And I've, tried, I want a shampoo. It comes in a big plastic bottle. So I've been challenged many times when I talk about it. Should I move to a shampoo bar? And, so many things that are there. But at the end of it, I think we need to have, internalize these issues. And it's not about feeling guilty or whatever. As I read from that quote in John Stott on creation care, and I think you should all get this book. Those who are remaining, means you're interested. It's a book by IVP, InterVarsity Press, John Stott on creation care, and you can just Google it and come out. And excellent. We thought John Stott just, didn't write many things about creation care. It's in his Radical Discipleship, he talks about it. But this book is just a wealth, an amazing wealth of things that he's reflected on and people have written as well. And it just changes you. It's not an option. It's not I'm being an environmentalist. It's just that this is the way I live as a Christian disciple. Dr. Kenny Anakan, I'm sure many of us know Dr. Kenny Anakan, and Dr. Kenny Anakan really inspired me, because for him, it wasn't just a separate big issue. It was just the way he was, looking after the environment, talking about it. And I don't think he would ever call himself an environmentalist. He would just have called himself, a Christian or a child of God who just lived that way because he believed in it through and through. So I think that's what we need to do in the church.
Yeah, just a comment, Cookie. When you started it very well, saying that the earth belongs to the Lord. The earth is God's. See, but unfortunately, many Christians and many churches sincerely believe that the earth belongs to the devil and Satan. The God is out of the world. For them, God is only in terms of our otherworldly salvation and things like that. That's number one. Secondly, there are other interpretation, very subjective proof text interpretation, where we'll interpret and they'll say, because anyway the world is going to end, so what we can do? So we can be only passive onlookers. We can't do anything. So there are so much of this kind of underlying misconceptions, false interpretations, and anthropocentric interpretations that leads to even neglecting creation care and also misusing and abusing God's earth. So that is where, even in the I think perhaps many of us sitting here, we will be aware of Lynn White's one article where he criticized that the entire Christianity is guilty of the present climate change condition. So there is perhaps some truth in his criticisms because of our anthropocentric interpretation, because we said every creation exists for us. That is where I think when you look at it, is embedded in God's character and God's purposes and God's concerns. And also when we look at Christologically, Colossians chapter 1, verse 16 and 17 is very crucial for us. 16, last part, it says, all things have been created through him and for him. All things have been created through him and for him. So if every creation, including the earth, very earth, if it belongs to God, it is not for us. And God's purposes, we as his disciples and followers have to be there to fulfill that. So I think that we also need to bring in that radical teaching even in our Sunday school onwards and also in our churches. Yeah, over to others. If you have any questions, you can ask directly instead of I am reading from the chat box. Those who are staying back. Questions or comments?
Maybe we can listen to Isaac a bit to share about what he had written in the chat about traditional methods of building and consumption. Isaac, probably you could share a little bit from your end.
Sure. I was just thinking about Ladakh and some of the traditional building styles, using mud brick and local materials. But even in the way of consumption, food habits, locally grown, locally sort of made, and the actual health benefits to eating local. Recently, I was looking at a diagram of how when we order food, our food is coming from so far, and it's become a habit to order food, for the sake of convenience, all of that. So I don't know if I can speak for the rest of India, but generally in rural communities, we find that we are growing our own food and consuming, that the distance between where we grow our food and where we consume is very little. My wife is from the Northeast, and she's from Meghalaya, and the habits I've seen there and in Nagaland and Manipur, we see a very sustainable way of life. And now one of the trajectories that I feel that modern life is on is a very Western trajectory, in how business models are being created and that. So
I think one of the things is with food habits, but then also coming back to my first point of architecture and looking at green building and the adverse impacts of the kind of building that we have with concrete and all the different materials that we have. Whereas these traditional buildings, in Ladakh, we have buildings from the 16th century that are still standing, made of mud bricks and using wood. Of course, it's a very different climate there, but I'm not an expert here, but I definitely think there's value in considering some of these more vernacular methods of livelihood, and I'm sure perhaps Matthew or Anita, you may have more to add to that.
Yeah, definitely Matthew and Anita, because some of us sitting here had been to Keystone campus. All the buildings, including the houses, office, everything is different kinds of architecture. Maybe Matthew or Anita can briefly throw light upon that.
Yeah, when Isaac was talking about different kinds of building materials, all our houses are made of mud, compacted earth, which is an earth taken from our own land. We don't have any concrete going into our houses. My house is more than 20 years old and it's absolutely fine. It's thermally fantastic. When outside it's cold, inside it's warm. Outside it's warm and hot, it's cool inside. So if we make conscious choices, I think we can do that.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, Matthew, I just wanted to add one addendum to that. So, I have many people, I don't want to say what background or anything, but they often ask me, Mole, will you ever get a pakka house? Will you always live in this mud house? So there's also this concern, that one day Anita is going to build a pakka house.
Maybe you should also show the photo of your houses. Otherwise, they will have a very, it's not hut. It's a pakka houses only. Yeah, we have stayed there in the houses. It's a beautiful houses made of mud walls, and even with upstairs. Matthew has an upstairs also. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise,
levels have dropped.
Yeah, I think we should.
Be hard moving now.
Yeah. Mr. Matthew would be moving into another planet now. Huh? Okay, then thank you again, once again, for each one of you for joining us. Thank you once again to Matthew, Anita. Very spooky, Cookie, and
There I am.
Duncan. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.